Hello everyone, this is Amit Khan and I work as a Senior Development Engineering Manager at Mentor, a Siemens business. Joining me today is Alan Graw, who is Vice President of IoT and Embedded Solutions at Sectigo. Together, Alan and I will present to you how to protect connected cars from emerging cybersecurity threats with a focus on embedded firewalls, secure communication, and strong identities. Many of you were present in the webinar I did last year over automotive-grade firewalls and its integration into AutoZone. So, to my longtime friends who were there, please do not lose hope. We got a lot of new information to quench your thirst for knowledge. I assure you that you wouldn't be disappointed. Let's take a look at the agenda of our talk. We'll begin with the introduction, digging into the basics of automotive network security. From that point, I'll pass it on to Alan, who will talk about embedded firewalls, strong communication, and authentication, and I'll do the wrap up of the overall webinar in the end. Let's begin with the introduction. Automotive industry is being driven by its megatrends, which are automation, connectivity, electrification, and sharing, or what's abbreviated as ACEs. ACEs is both an existential threat and a big opportunity. It's a new model of challenges, and survival depends on meeting those. There are two choices to survive. Either be the disruptor or at least respond quickly. The software content in a car is increasing tremendously, with more lines of code than most sophisticated machines of our times, like United States Air Force F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, Boeing 787 Dreamliner, or even a space shuttle. The hardware has to execute all that code, and the systems are more connected than ever before. The cars of the future will be interacting with each other. Safety and security would be a key for this. The systems have to be safe and they need to be secure so nothing can affect the car when it is driving. The focus of our talk today is on cybersecurity aspects. In my last year's webinar on cybersecurity, we learned that 2018 was termed a pivotal year for black hat cyber attacks on connected cars. Why? Because the connected automotive industry observed a rapid growth with a 6x increase in cyber attacks from 2010 till 2018. It's the slide that I used at that time. We discussed Jeep hackers Charlie Miller and Chris Walasek, who remotely killed a Jeep on the highway, and 1.4 million Jeeps were recalled after the incident. We also learned that the news was not just about Jeeps. You name a brand, from stealing a Tesla Model S to BMW zero-day flaw, from Volkswagen's Audi's infotainment flaws resulting into remote access to GM's OnStar unlocking and tracking. We'll find security vulnerabilities everywhere for connected vehicles. Here we are in the beginning of 2020. Let's see how the scenarios changed, if at all, in 2019. The graph on the left is from TU Automotive's Upstream Security Global Automotive Cybersecurity Report. From 2010 until 2018, the connected automotive industry observed a 6x increase. The number simply doubled in 2019 if we compare them to 2018. Look at the graph. That's an exponential increase path. Moreover, there is a 94% year-on-year growth since 2016. The figure on the bottom shows the comparison on a quarterly basis. A threefold increase was observed between Q1s of 2018 and 2019. Wow, I just wish these graphs and facts for our business growth. We would have been rich, huh? You want to listen some more facts? It's estimated that 57% of automotive liability will have to be paid by automotive ecosystem by 2050. Product liability means reliability and risk management. New business models will evolve, which means more complexity, reliability, risk, and liability. 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs are predicted by 2021. 3.5 million jobs. That's enough for 50 NFL stadiums. And cyber insurance is expected to hit $20 billion by 2025. That's gigantic, isn't it? Well, the increased number and effectiveness of automotive cyber attacks has called for an increased urgency of developing security solutions. An unprecedented level of government's intervention is observed around the globe with regulations and lawmaking to prevent these attacks. Let's take a look at some examples. US Security and Privacy in Your Car, or what's abbreviated as Spy Car Act of 2017, provides protection against unauthorized data access and reporting. This bill directs NHTSA to conduct a rulemaking to issue motor vehicle cybersecurity regulations that require motor vehicles manufactured for sale in the US to protect against unauthorized access to electronic controls and driving data. Similarly, in 2017, the US House of Representatives passed Safely Ensuring Lives, Future Deployment and Research in Vehicle Evolution Act, or what's simply called as Self-Drive Act. This bill would make it illegal for OEMs to sell, import or exhibit even partially automated vehicles without a cybersecurity plan, and the plan have to have intrusion detection and prevention systems, incident responses, and identification of an officer responsible for automotive cybersecurity. China has established an automotive cybersecurity committee to ensure the safe running of intelligent, connected, and electric cars. The committee is expected to serve as a platform to pool resources, carry out research, and work out standards, policies, laws, and regulations to defend cybersecurity in automobiles. The discussion over who owns the data has been a hot topic over the past decade. The debate is not only about who owns the data, but it is also a matter of who is responsible for protecting it. And this applies to connected automotive industry as well. Personal data regulations like EU's GDPR, Canada's Digital Privacy Law, which is abbreviated as PIPEDA, and European Parliament Transport Committee's call for EU regulation on access to car data are few examples in this regard. Before we dig into the technical topics, let's learn about the basics of automotive network security. NHTSA's Automotive Cybersecurity Research Program takes a threat analysis approach. A threat model identifies the conditions that must be in place for a potential attack to make an impact. It allows for categorization of attacks and provides a mean to group threats to allow for development of mitigations that would address multiple threats. NHTSA's model categorizes threats into 6 types, which are as shown in the slide. Spoofing is a situation in which a person or program successfully masquerades as another one by falsifying data to gain an illegitimate advantage. Tampering can refer to many forms of sabotage, but the term is often used to mean intentional modification of products in a way that would make them harmful to the consumer. Non-repudiation refers to a situation where a statement's author cannot successfully dispute its authorship or validity of an associated contract. For example, when the authenticity of a signature is being challenged, that authenticity is being repudiated. Information disclosure is privacy breach or data leak. Denial of service is a cyber attack in which the perpetrator seeks to make a machine or network resource unavailable to its intended user by disrupting the provision of services. DOS is typically accomplished by flooding the targeted resource with superfluous requests with an attempt to overload its systems and prevent legitimate requests from being fulfilled. Privilege escalation is an act of exploiting a design flaw to gain elevated access to resources that are normally protected from an application or user. As a result, unauthorized actions could be performed. Now that we know the types of threats, let's look at the attack surface of the connected car. For any type of threat to turn real, the very first step is to find a way inside the car. The second step is compromising an ECU, and the third is finding a control feature that could be compromised. To find a way inside the car or to exploit the attack surface of a car, there are 4 main areas. The first one is direct physical attack possibility. This includes an access to OBD or diagnostic port, charging port and harness connectors, and onboard vehicle networks. That means that a car is vulnerable when people have direct access to it. It's the case when a car is in for maintenance, repairs, or when someone lends it to other people. The second concerns the indirect physical attacks, which means that a carrier of some sort is necessary to carry out the attack. This carrier can be a USB stick or CD with a special WMA song that compromises the car firmware. Also, the existence of SD cards and firmware updates in modern cars open all kind of new attack possibilities. The third is about wireless attacks on a connected car. Bluetooth as well as an attack on or via the mobile network are possible. And the last is sensor fooling. There are no known hacks documented in literature that indicate that you can compromise and take over a car by fooling the sensors. However, sensor fooling is a real threat that can seriously harm the car. Connected and autonomous cars often use LiDARs. Research shows that camera-based autonomous car systems and LiDAR systems can be fooled in a cheap and easy way. These systems can be blinded or fooled with false information that might cause accidents. GPS also has vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Let's map these attack surface now to actual vehicles. On the left side, you see a picture of the modern vehicle architecture, which highlights connectivity within the car, including use of automotive gateways, multiple vehicle buses. It shows different types of domains like infotainment, active safety containing cameras and LiDARs, the body domain, and powertrain and chassis. We also see different types of buses used to communicate data inside a car. It's worth mentioning that gateway ECU is a focal point of attack because of its direct exposure to the external world. On the right side, we see the attack surfaces mapped to functional units like V2X communication, engine airbag and transmission control units, body controllers, telematics, and OBD. OEMs need to update software over the life of the vehicle, requiring ongoing access. We know that diagnostic port OBD2 is vulnerable to multiple documented attacks. Several protocols are in use, which include J1850, ISO 15765, CAN, etc., etc. Attackers generally need physical access, and it's important to note that monitoring systems open this port during remote attacks. Similarly, talking about the CAN bugs, many vehicle systems and ECUs are connected via CAN. Attacks require an entry point, and CAN bus is shown to be vulnerable to attacks. From these figures, we see that modern cars have multiple new entry points. These entry points are seen by hackers as new challenges and new opportunities. To prevent these from happening, let's understand what is security. So what do we mean by security? It got three features. First is authentication and access. Authentication, who is allowed to do things, and access control is what they are allowed to do. Second is protection from external attacks, which means protection against unauthorized controls, protection of data from being stolen, protection of communication, and ensuring that malware is not installed on the vehicle. And the last one is detect and report security incidents. Well, then to ensure security, we need a multi-layered approach that takes care of these traits. Let's take a look at the elements that constitute this approach. So for a multi-layered security approach to work, you would need to secure your external communication. One would need to secure internal communication, like for example, CAN bus messaging needs to be secured. Embedded firewall or intrusion detection to protect the vehicle from accepting unauthorized traffic, data or signals, and from being exploited by malicious payloads are required. Authentication is a key element. You would need secure boot or secure firmware update mechanisms, and a secure OS, multi-core framework, or hypervisor secured support is also required. At this point, I would like to pass it on to Alan, who would give you a deep dive into embedded firewalls, authentication, and secure communication aspects of our webinar today. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Ahmed. As Ahmed said, my name is Alan Grau, and I'm the Vice President for IoT and Embedded Solutions at Sectigo. And today we're going to talk about a couple of the aspects of building security into the connected car. As the last slide showed, there really are many factors that need to be considered, many different security solutions that need to be built into the connected car. Today, one of the things we're going to focus on is embedded firewalls and their role in protecting the connected car. So as we look at building a firewall into a vehicle, we're really talking about a specialized solution. And this isn't your Windows firewall running on a laptop. This isn't a networking firewall running in a router or a gateway or an enterprise solution. It's a specialized solution that'll work in the automotive environment. So we're talking about a firewall SDK, software-based toolkit that can be integrated directly with the communication stack, be it TCP/IP or CAN or other solution in the connected car. And as such, it has to meet some specialized requirements. It needs to be able to run on any ECU. It needs to be able to work with a real-time operating system or even an AUTOSAR environment. Some of those environments, are very resource limited. They don't have any dynamic memory allocation, and you just need a very unique, configurable, modular solution that will work across the many different types of vehicle ECUs that we're seeing today. So as we start to talk about the firewall, the first thing that we need to do is just take a step back and talk about the requirements. Why are we bothering to build a firewall into a vehicle in the first place? Well, many attacks start by sending packets to the connected car, sending packets to whatever device they're targeting. And if we can control that and ensure that certain types of packets are not allowed to be received or forwarded into the connected car, we can block many attacks before they even really get that first initial toehold into the vehicle. Right? We can control what ports and protocols the vehicle receives messages on. We can control what IP addresses are sending data to the vehicle. And we can also then report any suspicious activity. If we start to get a flood of packets from a specific IP address or other activity that looks suspicious, we can report that. Well, why is that important? Well, if you look at some of the early auto attacks, right, the Miller-Vilsack attack on the Jeep Cherokee is one very well-known attack. But that wasn't an attack where they just started sending a few packets to the car, completed a successful attack, and moved on. In their case, as with many cyber attacks against really all sorts of devices, but definitely applies in this case, the attack starts by probing the device. What messages can you send to the device? What response do you get? You might try sending, a modification of that. The Miller-Vilsack attack, they developed that over a period of time by trial and error, which required them to continually send messages to a vehicle and monitoring the results. If you've got a firewall in place on that vehicle, looking for suspicious activity and reporting that, you then know that something strange is going on and you can take some action to block that. And a firewall is critical in enabling that. Again, as I mentioned before, we're talking about portable source code that can be integrated into the ECU itself. The ECU or the firewall in the ECU needs to be able to be configured. So for example, if we go back again to the Miller-Vilsack attack, had there been a firewall in there and they reported, hey, we're getting suspicious traffic from these IP addresses or from this domain or that are sending these types of messages in, you could have updated the filtering rules to start blocking that. Another way of preventing the attack. The firewall is going to need to be able to support different types of filtering capability for different ECUs. It's going to need to be able to support CAN bus filtering. It's going to need to be able to support rules-based filtering, again, blocking by ports, protocol, IP addresses, things like that. It's going to need to be able to do threshold-based filtering, SPI filtering, or stateful packet inspection. So there's a number of different modules that need to be built in. And again, the logging and reporting of attacks gets back to being able to do intrusion detection, be able to say there's something unusual going on, reporting that back to some type of a vehicle operations center that can detect that, can take action based upon that information. And a firewall may need to operate in different modes. You may want an active firewall that's actually blocking. You may want it to be passive, where it's just looking for suspicious or anomalous activity and reporting it back. And there may be scenarios where you need to support a learning mode, where some of the behaviors, some of the expected traffic may not be all pre-configured. Some of that you may want to learn in a controlled environment, in a controlled setting, and then create rules based upon that. So there's different modes of operation. So when we look at the capabilities needed for an embedded firewall to be deployed in automotive, these are some of the key requirements to be looking at. So when we talked about the connected car, Ahmed talked about just the sophistication of the networks within the car. So it's a very sophisticated environment. So where do we deploy the firewall? Well, one option, and this is really the primary one that we've been working on with Mentor, is deploying the firewall on an external gateway ECU. So the ECU within the car that manages communication with outside entities, whether it's a cloud-based system. As we look at future vehicle-to-vehicle systems, right, the gateway is going to control that. It'll be the focal point for most communication with the car. Well, as a focal point for communication, it's now the focal point of attack. So the firewall can be integrated into the gateway ECU to ensure that we're blocking traffic there and preventing it from spreading further into the vehicle when it's malicious or undesired traffic. It's also possible to deploy the firewall on an internal gateway ECU. So if you have multiple networks within the car and you have a gateway between them to allow some communication between the different networks, you can deploy the firewall on that ECU to isolate those critical systems from potentially malicious traffic. And then it's possible to also deploy the firewall on an endpoint ECU, on the actual control ECU that's managing some critical function in the vehicle. And in some cases, you may want to utilize more than one of these. Security is all about defense in depth, multiple layers of protection. If one aspect of the security solution breaks down, you need to have other aspects come into play. So it may make sense to deploy the firewall on more than one location within the car. So the use case I want to talk about really quickly is, this is one, again, we're working with Mentor, the development of an embedded firewall solution on an automotive gateway for a leading tier one manufacturer in Asia. And in this environment, or in this solution, they're building a next generation vehicle, high levels of connectivity, and they have an external ECU, a gateway ECU that's managing communication. But that's become the focal point of attack. And so how do they build in network security? Well, one of the pieces is our embedded firewall integrated on that ECU, just controlling the packets that are forwarded to internal networks, blocking traffic based upon both pre-configured filtering rules and runtime behavior. And then, in addition, being the ability to report suspicious activity back to a management system. So this is an active current project. It's based upon an AutoSAR ECU. We've completed integration. That was complete last year. The customer has been testing, has done some successful trials, and we'll be deploying the solution this year. So that's been a very successful application of this technology with a leading provider. So again, multiple areas of security that are critical within the connected vehicle. Another one I want to talk about is secure communication. And again, here there's multiple use cases, communication between a car and vehicle operations center, maintenance and data collection centers, communication between the car and informatics systems. All of those need to be protected. Vehicle to vehicle communication, as that becomes more and more common, is critical to be protected. And again, communication within the car itself, between ECUs within the vehicle, all need to be protected. And when we're looking at this, we're talking about ensuring that each time a communication session is established, we know who we're communicating with. We've got strong authentication, that we're encrypting the data, and that we're protecting from common attacks. Now, we've been talking about firewalls, and while they're an important element, they're not the only element. We have to encrypt communication using protocols over IP like TLS, SSH. If we're running over CAN, we can use things like CAN crypt. So ensuring that we are encrypting the data, that we have strong authentication is really critical. But to do that, we need to have keys and certificates. And so we're going to Those are critical for those authentication processes. A digital certificate based upon a key pair, the private key, is the standard way of authenticating these communication sessions, again, whether it's cloud-based or device to device. But to do that, we need to manage those keys. We need to be able to generate the keys and have to have sufficient entropy on the device to generate those. And we need to have a way to protect those keys using a TPM or secure element. If we have strong authentication, but someone steals the key, well, then your security is broken down. If you don't have sufficient entropy, someone may be able to guess the key because it's not going to be very random. And again, security is broken down. So when we start to talk about secure communication, and you kind of peel the onion, there's many layers that need to be addressed. And again, in the webinar today, we're not going to get into a great deal of detail on all of those. We may do some future webinars to get to more detail on those. But there are things that you need to be aware of. Secure protocols are critical, but you can't just say, hey, I've got TLS, I'm good to go, without addressing some of these other concerns. And as we talk about the authentication process, that is a topic in and of itself. Here we need to look at the role of PKI and identity and how we manage and issue certificates. So each ECU has to be identifiable. We need to be able to authenticate, which requires that certificate, that identity on each ECU. And another aspect of security where certificates and PKI is critical is code signing. So again, multiple elements for security to the connected car, secure boot, secure software updates are critical in that process. And we're not going to dwell on that today. We may come back and cover that in a future webinar. But those all require a PKI infrastructure and code signing. So again, certificates play a role at each endpoint, and we need to be able to manage that. We're looking at having a private PKI hierarchy where an OEM or a consortium, an automotive consortium of OEMs, has their own root certificate that's managed, that can be used to issue code signing certificates to sign firmware, that can issue intermediate certificates to sign all of the device certificates. But so you need a certificate authority to do that. We have to have HSMs in place to protect those private keys. And then a way to manage the keys and certificates on the device. So it requires a PKI client on the device. There are multiple layers that are required here. And again, we're really just introducing the topic today, but wanted to make sure that we provide a little bit of context on the depth of requirements on embedded security for the connected car. So as we talk about the certificate authority piece, typically we're looking at cloud-based issuance for the IoT ecosystem. And it's a private ecosystem, right? We're not going to be running off the same root CA that's used for internet connectivity. So when your web browser connects to your banking system, that's using a public certificate authority or public PKI system. So here we're talking about a private ecosystem that is managed for an OEM, for a particular car manufacturer or a consortium of car manufacturers, so their systems can interoperate with each other, they can trust each other, but typically, again, not with public ecosystems. But it requires high availability, support for modern security protocols, the ability to automate the process. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of connected vehicles, potentially multiple certificates for each certificate, sometimes ephemeral or short-lived certificates that are only going to last for the duration of cars operating on a particular roadway connected to the vehicle, the VDX, the vehicle infrastructure communication solution. So high-speed automated certificate issuance is really critical. And then having a way to host and manage the entire process in a secure fashion really becomes critical as part of that. Right? Where is that CA hosted? How is the signing done? Is it automated? Is it secure? Critical requirements. And I mentioned the ecosystem part again. The root of the certificate authority or the root of the PKI infrastructure is what establishes trust, and that it can be shared across multiple vendors, allowing all the devices within that ecosystem to communicate with each other. So when we're talking about a single OEM and their solution, they can have their own route, their own ecosystem, and that works fine. But as we start looking at vehicle to infrastructure or vehicle to vehicle communication, where cars from multiple vendors have to talk to each other, we need to have an ecosystem that's shared across vehicle manufacturers with all those same requirements for an HSM, for security, strong management capabilities, and so on. When we put it all together, we're really looking at multiple connectivity points within the car, multiple solutions within the car. Really, the focus today is on how an embedded firewall can be utilized and how communication can be secured within the vehicle. And that's something that Sectigo is providing. We're working with Mentor on enabling that across a broad set of ECUs within the connected car. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ahmed to wrap things up. Ahmed, over to you.
Wow, that was really great. Thanks for that great show, Alan. I myself learned a lot. Thank you so much. Let me wrap it up from what I learned from you for myself and our audience. So, security for connected cars is a multifaceted problem. It cannot be an afterthought. To protect these devices, multiple layers of security are required. You need to assume that your device will be attacked, and security must be designed into every subsystem of it. Hackers attempting to penetrate an embedded device using remote attacks will probe the device for open ports and weaknesses. Blocking all unused ports and protocols shall limit the attack surface, which potential hackers can exploit. Logging packets that violate configured filtering rules enable detection of suspicious behavior. Most cyber attacks remain undetected until it's too late, and early detection is the key here. Moreover, it's important to independently enable and disable filtering rules like static filtering, dynamic filtering, DPI, and threshold based filtering mechanisms. When two devices are talking to each other in an automotive network, the communication needs to be secured to ensure that any third party cannot listen in. That is, any form of eavesdropping and interception are prevented. It is important to verify identity of a program or device in a way that is stringent enough in an intrinsic fashion. The authentication shall ensure the security of the system it protects by withstanding any attacks it's likely to encounter by verifying identities through something the user has or something the user is. And it's really nice if the cybersecurity configuration could be performed remotely with an enterprise security management system. This integration provides centralized management of security policies, situational awareness, and device status monitoring, event management, and log file analysis for data analytics. I would like to leave you with three thoughts towards the end of our session today. Automotive industry must prove itself trustworthy for humans to trust connected cars. Security is not a competitive differentiating feature. It's a must. And firewalls, strong authentication techniques, and secure communication mechanisms constitute vital elements of a multi-layered security approach. These would keep playing an important role to secure nodes in connected cars.
So we have a number of questions coming in, and we want to take a minute and answer a few of those questions. And the first question is regarding cybersecurity regulations and standards. And the question is just asking, which standards and cybersecurity protocols are meaningful and important for the automotive world, and how big of an influence do those have on the cybersecurity solutions being built into cars?
That's a good question, Alan. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, that's an interesting one to tackle. I mean, to the world in which we are living in, I see it very important that the world collaborates on the standardization activities, cooperates on the standardization in activities in a collaborative fashion, and then compete on actual implementation side of things. So as it is said that increasing regulation, the regulations are being pushed across the globe. We saw several examples in our webinar in which the US security regulations, China, EU, Data Protection Act, Canada. I mean, we see that trend across the globe, and we see it very, very important that the standardization activities to push up. We saw in the last summary slide, standardization is the key before global proliferation and deployment of any automotive software thing, and cybersecurity is just one of that aspect. AutoZar is picking up. There are other consortiums like Geneva is there covering their own areas. Avenue covers some of those. USB consortium, and there are a bunch of other efforts coming from ISO and IEEE picking up. So in my opinion, that's very, very important to standardize these components and have them built into cars in a standardized format.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, we've seen, as you said, a lot of different jurisdictions that are passing legislation. We've even seen the UN jump in and issue some standards or some regulations around cybersecurity in the automotive space. So it's very, very broad reaching. And in addition, as you said, not only are there legislative requirements and laws being passed, but there are also a broad set of industry groups that are creating standards. And, you know, from what I'm seeing, these really are causing companies to stop and take a look at what they need to do and build higher levels of cybersecurity into their cars. You know, one of the challenges with it that you alluded to is there are so many different standards that don't always match exactly. So usually they're fairly consistent and follow a fairly consistent framework, but there is an effort required to analyze the different standards, determine what apply depending on what market you're selling into, and make sure you're aligned with those different standards. So the next question we have just asks about the AUTOSAR standard itself, and if the firewall is a part of that, of the AUTOSAR standard, or if it isn't expected to become part of that.
Another good question. So thank you for noticing it and going through the talk first. And then firewall has not yet been standardized by AUTOSAR. AUTOSAR provides a bunch of security elements which include transport layer security. Some of those we saw in the talk as well, along with their crypto stack. Firewall has not yet gotten its place there yet. About the projection and roadmap, we have, as you know, an AUTOSAR latest release coming up in November, which is called as release R2011. It's not part of that release. Next year release, we don't know yet. I mean, they have one release per year. The Siemens firewall solution, we partnered with Sectigo to the firewall offering. Sectigo, as you know, is the largest industry's certification authority. Their firewalls is very well deployed into millions of devices, very robust, and we bring that firewall into an AUTOSAR environment integrated. That's where our design recommendations were coming from too, and provide a solution that is well deployed in the industry, but hasn't been standardized yet.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one more question, and we've got one on the secure boot process, and if you can, and the use of a TPM or hardware secure element. And so the question is just asking whether or not it's possible to use a TPM or other hardware secure element for assisting with and helping to provide a root of trust for the secure boot process, or if that can only be used for key generation and certificate handling. And now that's another great question. And when we talked about secure boot, one of the important critical requirements for a strong secure boot solution is having some kind of a root of trust. And the root of trust again is just some immutable code that we know cannot be modified. And or sometimes it's called the trust anchor, but basically some way to know that you've got a starting point that is guaranteed to be good and can't be tampered with. So if the device is hacked, the hackers aren't able to bypass the boot process or hijack the boot process and run their own code when it should be running the standard firmware that's been programmed onto the device. And a TPM chip or other hardware secure element can be used for that process. A TPM chip is a very flexible crypto chip, and it provides a pretty broad set of capabilities. It obviously, as we talked about, can be used for generating private keys for secure communication and authentication, but it can also be used as the trust anchor in the secure boot process.